Maybe you get what testing is all about. Maybe you've watched some tutorials about unit testing or TDD or refactoring. Or maybe you've learned about the solid principles, but you still feel like you don't get it on an intuitive level. If you're having trouble starting to write modular testable code, you're not alone. So many of these concepts are written about by brilliant programmers like Michael Feathers and Joshua Kirevsky, Bob Martin, and others. But they tend to write for other more advanced developers who are looking to improve their work. If you're just trying to get started down the road of testability, modular reusable code, and best of all, reliable changes, it can be a little daunting. I'm assuming you have some experience writing code, and you might even write code to help you do your job. This tutorial is geared toward people including bloggers who run their own WordPress blogs and end up writing code, people who are getting started writing maintenance or automation scripts to help them at work or at school, and students learning programming at school or university. I'm also assuming that you probably don't have so much experience that you're writing code full-time for a living. This is really for beginners who are actively trying to get better. I'm talking today about wiring harnesses and something I call the wiring harness pattern. A wiring harness is just anything that holds a group of wires together. Lots of things are wiring harnesses: USB connectors, zip ties, heat shrink, electrical tape. Even the insulated sleeve surrounding electrical wiring inside your house is a wiring harness. It's just something to keep related wires together and unrelated wires separate to make them easier or safer to work with. The wiring harness pattern applies this idea to programming code in two ways. One, harnesses surround and contain code we want to improve. And two, we improve code by organizing it in order: inputs, actions, outputs, and by encapsulating further when needed. Programming code organized in this way keeps related stuff together and easier to work with. The trick to the wiring harness pattern is we don't have to worry too much about the specifics of what each piece of code actually does. We just have to decide whether it seems more like an input or an output, and then use the pattern to help us make decisions about how to organize our code. This is a metaphor and a way of thinking about code, not a specific programming technique. There's good technical reasoning behind the wiring harness pattern, but here we're just going to talk about what to do, but not why we're doing it. This is because I want you to be able to start using this pattern right now. It's not a silver bullet, and it won't work in every situation. This is just one perspective on one technique for writing more testable and more modular code, but you can take this tiny idea and use it to improve your code today. Okay, let's get started. Here's a picture of some code, sort of in the abstract. We have some green lines representing inputs in our system. That's data that comes from somewhere else. And orange lines representing outputs. That's data that goes anywhere outside our little code block here. The harness goes around our code, wrapping it, and making the code inside reusable. That just means we can call the code anywhere we need to. For now, we're just thinking about our harnesses at the scale of a single function. Inputs would represent function inputs or results from other functions called inside them. Outputs are return values and new data going to other functions or systems. One last thing, the light gray lines represent actions. That's basically anything that works on code inside our block without sending it anywhere. This is generally where the real work of our code block happens. The techniques we use to change our code are called refactoring. This means a lot of different things, but at its simplest, it means changing code without changing what the code does. And that's going to be critical. We don't want to go reorganizing our code and end up breaking it. So what if we have a function that looks like this? Remember, the wiring harness pattern is all about getting our code in the right order: inputs, actions, outputs. Now it looks like all we need to do is start moving lines around, but obviously that's going to cause some problems. We want to refactor here, and that means being careful not to change or break the existing functionality. To reorganize this code, we're going to need to break it up a little bit. When refactoring, one good technique is creating new functions as needed to help you organize your work. Functions are just a way to organize and label your code so you can add them as you want them. You can see here we have this split into 3 functions, each of which has all the lines in the right order: input, actions, outputs. And if you follow the flow, you'll see that the lines are executed in the same order as before, and with a little testing, we should be able to verify the functionality hasn't changed. Let's take a look at a simple block of real code to help nail down the idea. The first thing we want to do is wrap this in a function. So what do we name it? Let's look at what the code is doing. We're getting some notes from the user, we're saving it to the database, and we're displaying it on the screen, so let's call it save and display notes. Now we've got something. This code is technically reusable. Let's go ahead and call it here, and we've only refactored, haven't made any changes that affect the functionality of the code. So let's see how well organized this is based on our wiring harness principle. Our input is at the top, next there is an output, but next we have an action which should go above the outputs, and finally the last output. Now it looks like the easy thing to do would be to move the database call underneath the action, and that would get everything in the right order, but this would modify the functionality. We'd be escaping the special characters before we save to the database rather than after. So we need to come up with a way to keep the functionality identical while letting us organize save and display notes the way we want. To do that, we break save and display notes up. Let's make two new functions. We'll call them save notes and the other display notes. Now we can organize our code without changing the functionality. Now we have these two functions, each of which is in the right order. Inputs, actions, outputs, pretty good. The only thing left is to get rid of these side effects if we can. Let's put the get variable here, and we'll pass the text variable into each function. This really makes the inputs and outputs clean on each function. All the inputs are in the function signature, and each function has just one output. So I hope this gives you an effective metaphor and a couple of simple tricks to organize your code. Here are some quick takeaways. Functions are just harnesses around inputs, actions, and outputs. Keep your functions organized in order, with inputs at the top, followed by actions, and outputs at the bottom. Add more harnesses, functions, as needed to keep your code organized. For now, when dealing with existing code, only refactor it. Try not to make any functional changes. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me here on Pluralsight, on Twitter, or HackHands. I love talking about this stuff, and I love helping. Thank you very much.